Hey everyone, welcome back for another edition of InsideChat, Stuart, Tomlinson Warrior Collective. Today I'm extremely excited to have Professor Joan Duda with us. She's a Professor of Sport and Exercise Psychology at Birmingham University. Hi Joan, how are you?
Very well, very well. Greetings from Birmingham.
Oh, it's well, you know what, I'm pretty sure I've been to Birmingham University before. Do you have a laboratory that's dedicated to working on sports? Because I remember, I think it was a few years ago, there was a research scientist doing some work on biomechanics, and they had all the dots on the athletes, and had the pressure plates they were testing.
Yes.
So some interesting. So is Birmingham University a kind of leading sports science university then?
Yes, we are. I mean, we, here in the UK, they do evaluations of research impact and quality every X amount of years, and that's a major funding exercise in the country. And University of Birmingham has been top or almost top, I think, since the first ones, which was in the late 90s. So we have a long established, I think, reputation in terms of really good research and then translation to various populations in society.
So can you tell me a little bit about, obviously you're a Professor of Sport and Exercise Psychology, but for those who maybe aren't too aware of what that means, can you tell me a bit about your role and about your kind of background?
Yeah, well, my background, I mean, actually, I started out in terms of this interest in sport psychology specifically as an athlete. In those days, used to play more than one sport. So I played through the intercollegiate level in terms of basketball. I'm quite a tennis fan. Going down to Wimbledon this weekend, I can't wait. And in terms of that was my interest in sports growing up, and then I was a psychology major, and eventually came across this field of sports psychology, which allowed me to basically combine both loves. So the area itself is focused on the psychological aspects that affect participation, performance, not just of elite athletes, but grassroots, recreational, weekend warriors, so on and so forth. And also we're very interested in the psychological impact or effects of engagement in physical activity and sport. So it's kind of that nice interplay. And myself as a researcher and as an applied practitioner, my focus is more on motivational processes. And it's kind of fun because I study those in two ways. I study those in sport, for example, the effect of coaches on athletes' motivation, but I also study in regard to inactive adults, patient groups, and trying to promote an active lifestyle, positive health behaviors in those populations as well. But usually in about everything I do, motivation processes are in there somewhere.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about some of the subjects you just mentioned in terms of what you really research and specialize in. I mean, motivation's obviously a huge one across the board, especially in terms of in sport. How do you? I mean, it's probably a difficult question, but how do you define motivation then? And in terms of sport, who is the person responsible for it? Is it the coach? Is it the athlete?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting. I think motivation's a word that's used a lot, and especially in sport and performance activities. The origin of the word motivate, the Latin origin, is actually to move, which is kind of nice because I mean, really, with motivation is about getting off the seat, so to speak, and doing something. But also, motivation can affect when we don't engage, when we may drop out of the activity we're involved in. But I think the best way to think about motivation is that it relates to the question of why. Why the heck are you there? Why are you doing that? Again, whether it's grassroots all the way up to the elite level. I also work besides athletes. I work with performing artists. So why are you dancing? Why are you playing the violin? And we know that there's different answers to that question. And those answers to those questions are very, very important in terms of the quality of motivation. So you could be participating because of, the quintessential intrinsic. I mean, I play tennis when the body's willing, because I love the sport. You can be engaging in something such as the training for your sport. Maybe it's not fun. Maybe it's not necessarily interesting right now, but you're pulling the strings, and you're engaging because you see the benefit. You can see what it could do for your performance or help you prevent injuries. You can be engaging in sport. I see this sometimes a little bit too much with young elite athletes, where they're engaging because they think they have to participate, maybe because of mom and dad and or the coach or the club or the something is, so they feel obligated. And or the answer to the why are you participating could be, the extrinsic type of recognition and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different answers. So really, when you think about motivation, it's the why to our engagement, no matter what we're doing, and then that answer to that why has it differs in who's in control, who's pulling the strings. Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for someone or something else? And those are very important differences in kind of the quality of the motivation.
So there's so many interesting points for that. I mean, with regards to, and again, it's going to change depending on the level of the athlete, the age of the athlete. But as a coach, then let's say as a coach coaching juniors, then let's take that as an example. What have you learned then through your research, for your time spent in this arena? What would you recommend to a coach on how can they help with the motivation of their junior athletes in terms of their regular training and ramping up towards progressing through the levels of competition?
Yeah, well, maybe going back to what's the original question about who's responsible. And what's very interesting, this is pulling from theories that we have in the literature, such as self-determination theory, achievement goal theory, and so on. There's a lot of theoretical understandings, a lot of research on these questions. But the bottom line is that when you do something because you want to, we say that's kind of autonomous motivation. It's self-driven. Regardless, weekend warrior, elite junior, professional athlete, there's got to be some of that still in you, to see kind of optimal engagement, sustained engagement, well-being, many other attributes. So it is interesting. I mean, kind of the foundations of what is quality motivation holds, regardless of what level you are. Now, implications for coaching just in general means that you may not have athletes that have a strong autonomous motivation. What you want is to nourish that. So really, at the end of the day, you want the athletes to motivate themselves. And you're almost, we talk in sports psychology about the motivational climate, the way you interact with your athletes. You want to set the stage, you want to set the climate so that the athlete has ownership of his or her own sport. That's the ultimate goal if you want sustained optimal engagement.
So what does that mean then? How do you create this climate then? Because obviously you get some clubs, coaches who are consistently successful, and then others who seem to, no matter how hard they try, they don't seem to produce consistent results, or they don't do very well. So obviously some gyms are doing it really well, and maybe they're doing something that they don't realize that they're doing. How do they create this climate then?
Yeah, well, I guess what I think the first point I'd make is that when I'm referring to a positive, optimal climate, it's a climate that produces results, but also sustained results. We don't lose the athlete, we don't burn the athlete out, and so on. But we also don't do that in a way that compromises their health, physical and or mental. I think what really excites me about this area of work that myself and my team are engaged in is that you could and we should have both. right? So I mean, what do we want with athletes? We want them to have a resilient sense of confidence. Sport is tough. You do lose, and then there's injuries, and then there's learning new techniques, and then there's going to places where you're not comfortable competing, and all those type of things. It is humbling. Sport is humbling, exciting but humbling. So you want to have that resilience to keep on going. And again, doesn't mean when you're a professional athlete you're not taking those humongous paychecks, but still is that passion in there. I mean, I was just speaking about tennis, that I love tennis, and hoping to go down to Wimbledon this weekend. What do I love about watching people like Rafael Nadal, or my Roger Federer, who I'm missing, or even Serena Williams? They don't need the money. There's still that desire to be there. There's something about hitting that ball and to keep, especially with the young ones coming up, trying to find a way to improve, and so on and so forth. So that's really what we're trying to foster in athletes. And going back to your original question there, Stuart, coaches play a very important part in that, with the climate that they create. And that climate is the climate, the way they interact, the way they give feedback, the way they show their, whether they care for the athlete as a person. There's many pieces to it, but the issue is that's normally how they are day in and day out, interacting with the athlete, both in training but also competition. So that, we want both of those climates to be optimal, because sometimes you have where coaches maybe like a Jekyll and Hyde. they act one way in training, but as soon as that scoreboard goes up, then they change. And if you just even think about that never can be optimal for the athlete, right? You want the athlete to have that consistent resilience and focus in both settings.
So yeah, and I'm guessing that it changes from grassroots to elite level, because as you just mentioned there, elite level, there's that added incentives of, this is their income, they're getting paid, but and then from the grassroots, then how does that motivation change then from these coaches who are coaching these juniors or adults who are walking through the door for the first time, up to, like you just mentioned there, elite athletes who maybe are mentally fatigued, because maybe they lose that motivation because they're doing it so much and they've done it for so long. So from a grassroots point of view, then what can a coach do to help someone foster a love and become to motivate themselves then?
Yeah, I mean, because that is the key. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that love needs to be maintained to have a healthy engagement in sport, no matter what level, no matter what that paycheck is. That is really what we want. So what we do with a lot of our work, we've over the years have developed a training program called Empowering Coaching, and it has this motivational focus. So we try to work with coaches to understand these differences in motivation that I was speaking about, to understand no matter what level, we've got to keep that autonomous motivation. Either we have to develop it if it's not there, and then keep that flame lit as they move through their competitive career. So we talk about that. But then we start to distinguish between what kind of behaviors and strategies are more likely to empower, to have the athlete feel a sense of ownership, a sense of being cared for, a sense of competence, and what type of strategies, even if well intended, that's what's very interesting, can come back to bite you or really compromise the athlete's engagement. So, and those are disempowering behaviors. So, for example, one type of empowering behavior is we've heard the adage about giving voice and choice. Well, it is very important that the athlete at any level doesn't feel like a pawn on the chessboard, that they have some input, that they feel like their opinion matters. Because at the end of the day, they're the performer, and at the end of the day, it's their sport. So it's how you can kind of nurture that. And, where we get into problems is when it's only one-way traffic in terms of who's running the show, and it's the coach or the athlete is following. And then you want athletes that are self-determined and can think on their own when they're on the mat or in the swimming pool or on the pitch or on the tennis court. So those are some of the objectives.
So you mentioned a program. Is that a program that's widely available? How is that delivered? Who can access that?
Yeah, well, we're doing it in different ways. This has been happening over the last couple of years. We've been delivering, I mean, empowering coaching as a program has evolved for almost 25 years. But it started with primarily, that's what one of the workshops and training I would do when I went out. But we've had a number of large projects over the last, let's say, 10 years that has allowed us to, importantly, develop a training program so we can teach people, train the trainers so they can go out and deliver it. And we're working in different ways. I mean, everything from we've done work with elite sport, with national governing bodies. We just the last year have been working, for example, with GB Archery in terms of training their first and second level coaches. We sometimes work with clubs. We also working internationally. So we were delivering empowering coaching in Spain. Some great work there recently with the Valencia Tennis Federation. Some good players are coming certainly out of that federation, and also the Valencian Football Club. We have work going on in Brazil, in Mexico, and just today it looks like we're going to get a project going in Hong Kong. So different parts of the world, and we're trying to gain momentum. But it's a theory, evidence-based program, and what we're really excited about is that we've tested it. A lot of times you go for training courses, and maybe you signed a little evaluation card at the end, and then that's it. But we've actually gone out and tested it. Does it change the coach's behavior? Does it change the athlete's perceptions? Because we can measure those things, the perceptions of the way the coach is acting, and we see those type of effects, which is very exciting.
So a coach who might be listening to this, who lives in the UK or maybe lives in the States, wherever, is it possible for them to access it as an individual, or do you have to be part of a wider organisation?
No, you can access it as an individual. I mean, we're going to go in that direction anyway, but obviously the pandemic facilitated that, is also delivering it online. Our preference is, when we can, is to get people around the table, to get coaches, even coaches from different sports, to talk about these concepts. But we do have a website, www.empoweringcoaching.co.uk, and give a holler if you are of interest. So individual coaches, sometimes we go and we work with a particular club, all their coaches that are working, let's say, in football, so on and so forth. So it's there's never a dull moment. And I think what's interesting is that just say coaches talk a lot about motivation, but really to get some key concepts and to have like a framework to be able to really dig a little bit deeper and see what they're doing, including all the good strategies that they may use, that it was working, but they didn't know why, and they didn't know how. So it can help you understand better good practice, but also the behaviors that may be a bit questionable, even though they're well intended, that coaches can self-reflect and start to see where this might not be the best thing in the long run.
So if you had to summarize a kind of basic framework, what would you say would be some good strategies that maybe a coach listening to this can take away today and implement into their own coaching, no matter what sport they're involved in?
Well, I'll just go back to the one strategy about voice and choice. We hear this, but how important that is. I mean, you were distinguishing between grassroots and elite, and I guess what I was saying in terms of the importance of autonomous motivation, nourishing it, maintaining it, that persists throughout. But obviously, when you're talking about young athletes, their notion of how they can input and what they can input would be different from a very experienced athlete, but everyone, at least when you ask what, or you ask how, or what did you think, or hey, here's a couple of choices. So you know, one of the things that happens sometimes is this notion like, well, if you are supporting the player's autonomy, you're no longer coaching, or you're not being a leader, or you're letting the athletes run the show. But actually, I would say when you're being empowering, you are like a super duper coach. You're coaching big time. But what you're doing is when you give choice, all those choices are good ones. You give a rationale for all those choices, let's say in terms of training effects, they understand. But okay, right now, which one do you want to work on? So that's actually very, very clever coaching, and you would really need to know the sport. You really need to know where the athlete is coming from, what's physically possible. So you've got your coaching hat on, but yet you're now having it as a conversation, and so that the athlete feels more part of the process.
Can you give an example of that? So just so we can kind of conceptualize it a bit more.
Well, I mean, let's say, okay, since it's one, but then I'll go to tennis. You'd be talking about to an athlete after, let's say, a competition. Uh, what were you working on? What were your objectives? What went well? What do you think you can get better at? All right. You identified that that service percentage wasn't where you wanted it to be. Uh, what do what's a realistic goal? What do you think? What do we need to do to get there? Is it more training? Is it actually working to get more power off the legs? In terms of technique, so on and so forth. So you're giving what are viable options, but now it becomes a little bit like the athlete helped identify the issue, and the athlete's now trying to help work with you in a cooperative way for the solution.
And going off that, then, what would be, and you mentioned it earlier, what would be a more of a harmful approach? What can harm the motivate? What are coaches doing that they might think are good ideas, but actually harming the motivation?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of ways. We talk about very controlling coaching, where it's again very didactic. It's my way or the highway, as we would say, and there's very little bit coming back in the other direction. I mean, coaches that intimidate. I mean, you all and your audience certainly have been reading or listening to the news in terms of some major national governing bodies and so on. When you hear about abusive coaching, um, this shouldn't be happening anymore. We know that the cost of that, cost in terms of well-being, the cost in terms of health, but also the cost in terms of long-term achievement and the health of your program. It's just not the optimal way to go. It's not You're not going to build resilient confidence with these type of behaviors. So intimidation, when coaches purposely use the extrinsic rewards to try to motivate, the carrot all the time, or the carrot and the stick type of approach. It may work in the short term, but long-term engagement and quality engagement, and the athlete you're working with uh, it still stays as a very healthy person, human being. You're not going to get it with those type of behaviors.
And in terms of an individual, like an athlete, grassroots to elite, do you look into self-motivation? Do you have any advice for an athlete who maybe needs to find their motivation or re-find it? Are there any strategies that you kind of work with athletes on that sense?
Yeah, so self-motivation, I would say, is that autonomous motivation. Speaking Latin again, right? Auto is self. So, and that's very important. I mean, when I do one-to-one consulting with athletes or performing artists, that's one of the questions I often ask them, like a professional ballet dancer. Well, why are you dancing nowadays? And you often get a pause, like, I've just been doing this year after year after year. I haven't even thought about why I'm doing it anymore. So it's actually trying to rekindle those memories, to be thinking about, what put you on the courts, or what put you in the competition in the first place, to find ways to keep your confidence, as I say, resilient, that you at least keep going in feeling like you're getting better, you're challenging yourself. Uh, Fear is never a good motivator. That's not, I always say, when you fear, for example, you fear failure, and I talk to athletes a lot about this, you never jump as high, you never run as fast, you're never as quick with your movements or anything. Fear is quite a disabling way to be motivated. So it's kind of find, why are you there, and if that flame isn't there, then find something else. If you can't rekindle it, and you realize, and sometimes that happens as well, especially working with junior elite athletes, when they realize, I've never been doing this for myself. I never really liked the sport. I would rather do X. And I guess that's where I'm a psychology consultant that cares about the person. And then I'd say, well, you know what? Go do that. Because that's, it is your life, and that's what's going to give you a greater sense of achievement, satisfaction, self-motivation, and then probably well-being as well.
I guess it's difficult as well with juniors, because especially in today's society, with the increase of the digital world, social media, there's a tendency to sometimes flip from one thing to another, and not see things through for the long term. So I'm guessing it can be hard for some coaches and even parents to figure out, where this line is that we've got to support them through a short-term obstacle, or if it's an absolute, no, this is the end of the road.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do work and have worked quite a bit with parents. Whenever you're working with junior athletes, you need to have conversations and talk about the climate that parents create as well. But one of the ways I try to explain it to them, I mean, again, sport is difficult. Sport is humbling. Sport doesn't always go your way. Your child coming back right now after hard training and throwing the old gym bag in the corner is one thing. Your child coming back looking really despondent after a tough loss is one thing. But if you start seeing that there's no twinkle in the eye, uh, no desire to go back day after day after day after day, um, there's got to be something that needs to be addressed, and that's where conversations between parents and children are very important as well. What's going on? What are you feeling? Where are you coming from? Because eventually children are so fantastic. But if they really do, if they're autonomously motivated for engaging in swimming, that twinkle will come back. After they're a little bit teed off and frustrated, it'll come back. If it doesn't, then there's something we need to do.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned parents there, and a lot of people talk about the gym-athlete relationship, but actually the parent-athlete relationship, especially in the younger ages, is equal, if maybe not of more importance at times, because the parent has to take the child to training, the parent has to support, otherwise, no matter what the coach does, it all falls down. When you mentioned you've kind of done some work with parents there, what would you recommend to parents in terms of how they best help their children in terms of motivational for their particular sport?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let me say you're absolutely right. The parental climate is very, very important, and I can say, both based on research and my applied work. Here's a worst case scenario where you have a young person that, let's say, is in a disempowering gym, and then gets picked up and goes in a disempowering car back to a disempowering house. I can tell you that that child is going to be in trouble quite soon. So both environments are absolutely critical, but the parental environment is the most important, because that's the foundation of the house, and that's the climate for life. So I think that these points about yes, even voice and choice and so on with your children, but I think the key thing there is is to do everything you can to have it that the child is doing what he or she wants to be engaging in. What is the challenge? What is of interest? Because it is their sport and not our sport in that regard. So that's very important. And I think probably the other major suggestion I would make is that if the child knows that you're mom and dad and you love and you're there regardless, if I blow it on the track, or I lost the match, or I didn't score the penalty goal, whatever. Just knowing that gives that sense of security. So less likely to live in fear, less likely to be, trying to please others. So parents play a very, very important role.
And going from motivation, one of the things that you mentioned, obviously, and one of the things that I know that you research is obviously mental skills and mental toughness. I mean, a lot of people talk about physical training, cardiovascular, strength and conditioning, but maybe a lot of coaches, athletes, sports underestimate the importance of a similar attitude towards the mental skills. How do you view mental skills training then, and how do you recommend coaches or athletes put this into practice?
Yeah, it's getting better, I think, in terms of the sport world understanding the importance of mental skills training. But basically, at its heart, it is to have the athletes be able to be self-aware, to be able to monitor and to some degree regulate. We never can totally dictate how we feel and how we think, but get a little bit more control over our thoughts and cognitions and our emotions and so on when we're competing, for example. So that's really at the heart of mental skills training. And you have, I'm sure your audience has heard about imagery and concentration training and positive self-talk and relaxation or arousal regulation, goal setting. They're all kind of the fundamental techniques. But at the end of the day, it is to give this awareness of where am I going with my thoughts and emotions and so on when it goes pear shaped, when I start to not play or participate or perform the way I would like, and what seems to be a little bit more optimal, and to start to really distinguish those, to monitor a little bit, and then develop these skills so you can regulate, where you're coming from. And I think the other major principle is, how do you do that? You start to do that systematically when you're doing the physical training, when you're doing the physical skills, sports skills training, and you start to do that regularly so that they're integrated. I think one of the ways that mental skills training has been misunderstood and misused is when you have this big distinction. All right, we do the physical training right now on the pitch, and when you're home tonight, work on your imagery. Nothing wrong with working on your imagery when you're home, but if you're not using that somehow, or the breathing or techniques or whatever, when you're in the heat of battle, when you're doing the activity, it's never going to be effective. So we really talk about how to integrate those, and that's where I think coaches can really play an important role to recognize how important this is, and then in training, and then moving it into the competitive. It's like anything, when you want to learn a skill in training, but then you've got to bring it to the competition. It's the same thing with the mental skills, but that they are every time. I mean, I think the classic examples would be in tennis before you're serving, or hitting the golf ball. Those are the most obvious ones, where you want to be doing the same thing that regulates you to kind of, as best as we can, get into the right headspace and the right physical space to execute.
So you mentioned obviously the program before about motivation. Is there a resource that you provide or that you'd recommend for a coach or even an athlete or a parent that wants to help develop mental skills training with themselves or with their athlete or child?
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the things I say that, if the genie, if I'm working with athletes or I'm working with a club or a team, and I said the genie gave me two wishes. Okay, I want two wishes to have the situation be much more optimal. One would be that that climate is empowering, and we're promoting autonomous motivation. The second would be, and we're also then working on the athlete's development of his or her mental skills. If you think about that, I mean, boy, that's a really solid house. That can really take a lot of strain, setbacks, so on and so forth. Um, I mean, we kind of do that in extended parts of empowering coaching, but I mean, there's so many resources right now online just to learn some of those skills. Um, and the books are a dime a dozen. There's a lot out there, but I think just in terms of basic mental skills training, very very important. And what we want then is that they're learned, and then the athlete tailors for himself or herself, in terms of what is optimal for every athlete that needs to be quite activated and so on before they perform. There's another athlete that actually needs to be very calm, very mindful. That term is quite popular now, right before they perform. The issue is we want both of them to be able to self-monitor and get to their best space.
So if let's say, for example, I had a parent and their child was training, doing all the right things in training, but every time they went to compete, their emotions would get the better of them, and they struggle in the competitive format because they're maybe performance anxiety. And again, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
physical thing, because in the gym they're doing all the right things,
Yeah.
they're looking great, but they keep struggling at the competition element. What would you say to them would be the best thing for them to do in terms of, because again, it's not a physical thing, is it? It's emotional, it's mental skills.
No.
What would you recommend to that parent then, or even the coach?
Mm. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, to your point about sometimes, like I said, it is changing, thankfully, but coaches primarily focusing on the physical aspects, the strategy, the technique, and so on. But then when you talk to coaches about athletes right now that they don't think they're worried about, that are not performing optimally, and so on, what comes out? 99% psychological. So then you always throw it back to them. Well, if that's so important, if that's what's distinguishing the best, the most consistent performers, and those that are less so, then why don't we work on it systematically? So I think what happens with that, and that's very common, unfortunately, is where you see yeah, I can do it in training, but I struggle in competition, is it's usually at least one of two causes, and maybe both. One is that they're either not working on the mental skills, and if they are, they're only doing it in training. And then everything goes out the window when they compete. So you need to think about that as a coach and as a parent. That means, just like every physical skill, you need to start executing it in competition. So same thing with your mental skills. This is not trivial time. This is not trivial behaviors that you're doing. So to make sure you make that transition and you get um, confident that you can do it when the going gets rough, and it almost becomes automatic, in terms of your pre-performance routine or something of that nature. And the second would be, I think, when there's a lack of knowledge about that climate and those behaviors that make something more disempowering, is this point that, all right, you're doing some empowering behaviors, giving some voice, choice, focusing on improvement and whatever in training, and then you become a whole different person. The weather system changes completely when you get to competition. Well, guess what? Then especially the young athlete, but I think any of us will change in the way we're acting, in terms of now becoming more hesitant and maybe, as you say, marked by competitive anxiety and so on.
So it kind of leads me to the next thing then, which is like mental toughness. I mean, when we talk about mental
Mm.
skills training, how do you define a mentally tough athlete then?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that term is out there. I mean, in the literature, there's different definitions. To me, it's a mentally tough athlete optimizes successes in the sense of taking the confidence from them, from those experiences, and not afraid to keep challenging themselves and to keep improving. But they also optimize failures. They're not devastated. They're resilient again. They learn from the failure. They pick themselves up by their bootstraps and dust themselves off, and try to think about, why did it happen? What can I do to keep moving forward? What do we know from the literature? Well, athletes that practice mental skills and develop those capabilities tend to have greater mental toughness. We also know from the literature that if you tend to be in an more empowering environment, you tend to have greater mental toughness. So all these things are kind of all interrelate. Now, sometimes you do hear this assumption that mental toughness is like a personality trait. It's like you're born with it. And I guess I'd say that that's we may develop these characteristics, but I think there's a heck of a lot we can do as an athlete and as a coach and as a parent to promote mental toughness. It's not fixed in stone from the moment we're born that we're either mentally tough or we're not.
I mean, going from my own experience, and obviously if we're talking from the context of combat sports, obviously combat sports are, they're typically, facing aggressive opponents. The contact is, getting the hit in the face. If you make a mistake, a loss feels very personal because it's a fight. And historically, the athletes and the competitors who do the best are mentally tough, but also they've come from maybe backgrounds where they've not had a great home life. Maybe they've come from poverty or, so there's that correlation between maybe a harder upbringing or a harder environment. And what would you say to that then? Because is there a correlation between being physically tough and mentally tough?
Well, I think they can complement each other. I think for an athlete to be mentally tough, and confidence is the key part of that. You've got to trust your body. You need to know you put the work in. You need to know you have the fitness and the good techniques and so on, and that certainly helps facilitate the mental toughness. But we all know you can be fit as a fiddle. You can have all the physical skills and so on, but if you're not mentally tough, we're not going to optimize either. So I do think they work together. I mean, your example about, let's say, young people that have come from very difficult backgrounds and managed to have maybe mental and physical toughness. Somehow that they were accepting the challenges, internalizing them, still constantly motivated to come there and do boxing or karate or whatever, so still the same principles are operating. But, when I hear those type of things, I like to see the broader data. And what we know is that young people that are coming from disadvantaged communities are, for example, less likely to participate in sport, less likely to be physically active and have the necessary fitness for health and so on. So I guess what I'm saying, and you need to look at the whole population. And I think growing up in disadvantaged communities, it's not that the world is awful, and it's not that there's love and care and all those type of things, but in the scheme of life, it's something we as a society need to take care of, so we don't promote health inequalities. But those kids that walk through the door and somehow manage to stay with footy, to engage, to be brave, to embrace what they're doing, those are very exceptional young people.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I mentioned, like, historically, just going off my own experience and the background that I've seen within combat sports, I guess, I completely agree with the environments being important. I guess I was making the point that in combat sports, where obviously you've got to face another person, for someone who's grown up in an already difficult environment, they're already a little bit physically tougher, and also they're kind of wanting to maybe best themselves, you know, and those grassroots combat sports, because they're typically the lower cost sports in those areas, and
Sure.
there's the whole, again, it's quite male dominated, it's those male role models. So I guess I was just making that kind of point, just because of what I've seen, because it's not just, like you mentioned before, it's not just one thing, is it? It's like the whole sociology of sport intermixed with, you know, motivation and performance. And I guess I was just asking the question just to hear what you thought of that example.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think, Stuart, you hit the nail on the head with probably what is the circumstance of those young people that come into the gym and have really embraced the sport and really are doing well. I guess I'm saying that there's a lot of kids in those communities who are not coming in that gym, and we've got to reach out to them. So if we, you know, these are the survivors, as they say. One of the projects that we're involved in, that we're very proud of, and really looking forward for this project to have great impact. It's called the Leveling the Playing Field project. That's led by the Alliance of Sport. It was funded by the London Marathon Charitable Trust. But it's working in these communities with these young people who still, as a group, as a population, are less likely to be doing sport per se. Because that was my point. And trying to reach them with positive mentorship. We're doing some work as well, trying to bring the empowering coaching motivational side, so that when we get those kids there, let's say on the football pitch, we can really optimize the best we can those experiences and time together with them as, you know, positive role models, as having a chance for the kids to interact with other kids in a very positive way, to feel like they belong, they feel good about themselves, and then also hopefully feel good about football and boxing or whatever it may be. So this project is going on right now in 4 different parts of the country, all different type of activities as you matter, because these are, talk about warriors. To me, especially in this pandemic, the warriors were those people that were delivering or trying to deliver, even online when we were in lockdown, with those young people, trying to keep them engaged, to keep them having a sense of purpose, and that they're going somewhere, are the ones that in these community, we call it third sector. Well, they are really the first sector in many ways in terms of their benefits and what they've been giving to young people in this country.
Yeah, and you know, I was involved in projects like that over the pandemic myself, so I know how important they were. And you know, when we talk about mental toughness as well, I guess you have to talk about mental health, don't you? Because they kind of go hand in hand. And so I'm guessing the question that is, how does a coach or an individual help improve mental toughness? What would be your kind of answer to that question then?
Well, so if we go back to competitive sport, nothing we're talking about here is saying, you know, no competition. Nothing we're talking about here is, oh gosh, you want to have the kids win all the time, right? That everything is rosy, yellow brick road, or you know, you develop mental toughness by your sense that you can do something, and you can keep moving forward, and you can keep growing. And when things go bad, this is a temporary state. There's something that can be done, and it's to have the confidence to be able to do that. So it is. That's, I think, the best way to think about mental toughness. Is it's almost like a journey. It's something that you take with you. Difficult to be mentally tough when you're doing an activity because you think you have to do it. So motivation comes into play as well. But it's testing yourself, but knowing you have the resources. To test yourself without the resources is a pretty scary thing. but having to, keep testing yourself and that you come through. And even that, I mean, even the greatest athletes, um, there's times when they didn't make the last buzzer shot, or they didn't hit the penalty shot, or or they double faulted on the last key point or something. But to realize that to couch that and to keep on going and keep on working on your game is that it's not a done deal. I think that's the beauty of mental toughness.
And I guess what you mentioned earlier as well is going to be very important, and that's the relationship between the coach and the athlete, and that's so fundamental and key to a lot of the things that you've mentioned today. And it's because again, it's different to each sport, isn't it? Because each sport requires a different type of coach and different kind of approach because of the nature of what they're coaching, but also I guess the amount of people that coach is having to coach at one time. It's easy when you're coaching one-to-one, but if you're coaching a big group, how do you maintain the principles that we've talked about today when you're dealing with these, bigger numbers all the time?
Yeah, so I guess that is the point. The principles I'm talking about today do apply to different sports. The question is, how do you bring them to life? And I mean, with team sports, you still have interactions one-on-one, but how do you give voice and choice, let's say, to the team? How, when can a team actually work and decide on some norms or some strategies and so on and so forth? So you still can evoke and try to apply the same type of principles, regardless of the nature of the activity. So there is the kind of the coaching aspect of what is a sport and what is the technical and how much interaction you have and when you do and so on and so forth. But that motivational climate aspect is consistent across all sports. And that's what we have to optimize. I think that's where we can promote mental toughness, and we're more likely to promote quality motivation.
No, I agree completely. Well, it's been amazing talking today. It's been a real eye opener and education.
It's been
and again,
fun.
yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. And obviously I've been involved in sports all my life. It's kind of like the cornerstone of my life. But to hear it from your point of view and all the research and all the projects that you're involved in, and I'm sure that you have been involved in the past, have allowed you a deeper insight into these things than most of us. So it's been really interesting, and from someone who I still coach still. I'm still involved in coach sports. I've always loved being involved in coaching and training. And even when we're talking, I'm kind of like thinking,
it's very rewarding.
I need to improve. You've made me think I need to improve that now in my coaching. Like I have to think more about that. So
we'll get you an empowering coaching.
Do you know what? I'm kind of like going, I'm going to have to book onto that. I was just going to mention for anyone who's listened to this now and goes, do you know what? That's what I want to get involved. Is there somewhere they need to go, or should they get in contact with you? How can they follow up with this?
Yeah, probably go to either both ways. They could email me at the University of Birmingham, or we do have the website.
So is that the Birmingham website? Is that the university website? Is it?
It's no, it's empoweringcoaching.co.uk.
Right. Well, I know.
Or email me at my Birmingham email address.
I'll put the links in below, just to and everything, just so that everyone knows that. But I'll be definitely checking that out myself. You've kind of got me thinking now. Like, that's it. No, I'm super excited about that. I mean, it's definitely up my street, and everything we've talked about today. It's so it's so all encompassing and so important. And I guess for you, it's easy to see how this affects not just sport, but everything. I guess the rules that apply to sport can apply to most things. It's been
true. I mean, for all our jobs and everything, the motivational dynamics are the same. Motivational dynamics are at play.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I can see that. But thank you so much for spending the time. And I'm sure, like I said, everyone listening's had taken a lot from it. And I'm sure you'll get more than a couple who now are going to get in touch and want to know more. I'll be the first of that queue. But thank you once again for sparing the time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. I enjoyed it.